That's great. You just tell me, you give me the word when you're ready.
I'll be with you in 2 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. It's really wonderful to be with all of you, to have this opportunity on a Wednesday night or Wednesday morning for Rabbi Israel to sit and to think a little bit about, to reflect upon the legacy a bit more, to reflect upon the legacy of the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. And we're really honored to have one of the foremost teachers of Tanakh and Torah in Israel, and someone who he might not know this, but I've really been getting a lot from his Torah and the reflections that you, Rabbi Israel, have been writing about your teacher and mentor and Rabbi Sacks, but also in general your Torah. And I've got your book on Malachim, on Kings, right over here, which has been a great resource for me, and especially as we've been doing the 929 project here in our shul in Blake Street. When we were in Malachim, we really were drawing upon your insight and your wisdom. And so we thank you for that. And it's really just an honor for us to have you tonight with us to reflect a little bit upon how Rabbi Sacks has really, really impacted the whole world. And as you say, and as we'll learn, has reframed Judaism. So just very briefly, I'm not going to introduce you because everybody will have read the bio. But needless to say, Rabbi Israel is, like I said, one of the leading teachers of Tanakh and Torah in Eretz Yisrael, and is at Pardes and Lindenbaum and doing incredible things, and is really an essential voice in the Torah world today. And so it's really our honor to have you with us. And without further ado, I'm not going to take any more of your time. Over to you, Rabbi Israel.
Okay, so thank you really very much, Rabbi Sender, and thank you to everybody who has taken time out this evening to be with me and to be together and to honor the memory of Rabbi Sacks. And in this sense, I really feel a responsibility to his memory to share a little bit about his Torah and his personality, and that's what we're really going to do. I think the loss of Rabbi Sacks, it's funny, somebody dying at age 72, that we say, we lost him prematurely, but it was very, very, very sudden. Even the family really were taken aback when they found out how severe his illness was. And he really slipped away, suddenly. And we all feel that he had many, many more years, even decades, to give to the world. And we're really, really grateful that we have at least a whole library of books of his, which we can draw on. If just to give you an example, this is a picture of my desk at the moment. So that's what my desk looks like. These are just a selection of some of his books, right? So that's what we're talking about. So I'd like to share a few thoughts about Rabbi Sacks, and we're going to actually go into his books and his thinking, but let's try and see if we can talk. I'm going to start off with a few personal comments. We all know that Rabbi Sacks was, an amazing philosopher who could distill complex ideas into very simple and comprehensible statements, even pithy statements. He was an advocate for the Jewish people. He was a global ambassador for Judaism, a inspirational speaker, a writer, and a teacher. He accompanies us with the Siddur and with the Machzor through our daily prayers. And what I'm going to do, what I'm going to talk a little bit about is we're going to do this. We're going to talk a little bit about my personal interaction with him. Then I want to talk about his exposure to the world, his message to the Jewish people, and then we'll talk a little bit about the fusion between them. So that's how we're going to structure things, and we'll have time for questions at the end, and all of that. So maybe the aspect with which I'd like to talk about Rabbi Sacks in the most, where I met him, and which I think was one of the areas in which he was just so special, was, I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to start off with a source here, which I heard him teach to me. And it's a very sort of strange Mishnah. The Mishnah says the following. It's a Mishnah from Pirkei Avot. Maybe many of you will know it. Chamisha Talmidim Hayulu Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he had 5 students, and they named them Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, number 2, Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya, number 3, Rabbi Yossi HaKohen, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach. And then it says, he would count their praises. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, a sealed cistern that doesn't lose a drop. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus had a tremendous memory. Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya, fortunate is the women who gave birth to him. I'm not sure what but he was clearly a pleasure. Rabbi Yossi the Kohen, Chassid, he was the pious one. You know, he was the one who was very pious in the group. Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, God-fearing. Interesting what the difference might be between Chassid and Yorei Chet, but not for now. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach, an ever-increasing wellspring. In other words, he was the creative one of the group. Rabbi Sacks asked the question on this Mishnah, and he said, what does this Mishnah teach us? After all, nice. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 disciples, and they had certain strengths, but what every other Mishnah in Pirkei Avot we learn something from. What can we learn from this? And he said the following. He said, language can sometimes be descriptive. I will describe that thing, that is a tree, that is a car. But sometimes language can be prescriptive. It can be creative. It can create new realities. After all, how did God create the world? He created the world through language. And he said the following, what does a good teacher do? He says, imagine that you are, let's say, a high school student. And we all remember that stage in our lives when we were going through school and we learned maths and we did arts and we learned history and we studied physics, right? And we studied a bit of this and that. And we said, what am I going to study in university? What am I going to be when I grow up? Some of us are still asking that question. And he said what was amazing about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was that he was able to turn around to his students and look at them and say to them, you're really good at that. Hey, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, you're a sealed cistern that doesn't lose a drop. You've got a phenomenal memory. And then what happened? Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus walked away and said, wow, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to focus on my memory. I'm going to keep on memorizing and memorizing. And that's what he dedicated him to. And Rabbi Yossi Cohen, the Chassid, he said, you know what? I don't know if you're got the best memory, but you're a pious man. And he said, you know what? If that's what's so special about me, I'll focus on my piety. Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach, the ever-increasing wellspring, you're the person who is so creative. So he started writing down his chidushim and published them and what have you. What I'm trying to say is that a good rabbi, a good teacher, a good high school teacher, a good leader is able to look at the people around him and value them for what they are and take that seed and let it grow. That's what Rabbi Sacks did for me and for so many people like me. You know, when we hear about Rabbi, Lord, Professor Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, we imagine somebody, and indeed he had a great sense of presence. I saw some of you maybe met him or heard him, and he had this great presence on stage. But when you got to speak to him one-on-one, it was intimate, it was personal. He would tell you personal things and would share thoughts which he wouldn't share on a public forum. And when I was a student in London, I'd spent a couple of years in Israel and then went back to the London School of Economics. I heard Rabbi Sacks wasn't even yet chief rabbi. He used to give public lectures in different shuls. Me and my friends, we all used to get into the car and we used to go and hear him wherever he was because he was amazing. His Torah put our world into focus. Suddenly here was somebody who was so erudite, who had read everything, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, and yet he could bring our world into focus. And yet, when I eventually managed to get an appointment with him and meet with him, well, first I'll mention, when I was a student at Bnei Akiva Madrich, I suggested to his organization a conference for students, for my chanichim. And Anglo Jewry at the place, British Jewry at the time was very, very hierarchical. Kids, students didn't get much of a look in. You had to sort of have gray hair. Now I have, but to be able to have a say. I was 23 years old. I suggested a conference. He took it on. He budgeted thousands of pounds for it because it was something for young people. He always believed in helping young people to grow in their Judaism. And when I eventually went to see him as a smicha student, I got precious half an hour in his office. And I discussed all my questions with him. As I said, it was a very lovely meeting. When his secretary came in and said, Rabbi Sacks, the half hour is up, he said, "This is the best fun I'm having all week. Why can't we carry on?" And she said, "Well, you've got an appointment." And then, you know what he did? He gave me a piece of paper with his personal phone number and said, here's my phone number. Call me any time of day or night. If I can answer, I will. We can always talk about these things. And he kept on telling me, you should write a book. You should come back to England and be a Rav. When he realized I wasn't going to come back to England, he encouraged me all the time. You can be a leader. I can't wait to see what you do. The last time I went to see him, he said, "Okay, you published 2 books. What's the next project?" First of all, such a sense of raising people up. He really believed in the principle of Chazal, Ha'emidu Talmidim Harbe, and this is true about everyone I know from England of my generation and the generation below me, who all say, "I went to meet with Rabbi Sacks. He told me, go for it, do a PhD, go do smicha. You're wonderful. You've got great ideas." And this is amazing that he took an interest in young people like me. He challenged me, he believed in me, and he made me believe in myself. You know what, I'm going to say something even more. The last time I went to see him, I especially traveled to London. I published a book and I wanted to give it to him personally. And I went to London for a wedding and for that, and I went to see him. And we discussed a whole bunch of stuff. And when I finished with my questions, he turned around to me and he said, "Alex," he said, "what can you teach me?" I said, "What?" He said to me, "Well, tell me, what's going on in Israel? What religious thinkers haven't I heard of? What books haven't I read? What?" Suddenly I started talking about something. He was listening so powerfully. I felt like I was the teacher, he was the student. What a humble man. What a modest person, that he always wanted to learn. And again, don't think it's anything special about me. Rabbi Sacks' favorite phrase when he spoke about this was that leaders create followers, but great leaders create leaders. And he wanted to create leaders. When he retired, he used to spend several weeks a year at NYU, New York University in South Manhattan. And one of the things he used to do every single time he went, whether he went there for 10 days or whether he was there for a month, he'd turn around to the rabbi of the campus and says, "I've got from 8 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. Plug me in every 20 minutes a different student. I want to meet with students." And he'd give an entire day from morning till evening. They said all he'd do was eat. The only food he had all day was yogurts. They'd bring him a stack of yogurts and water. And he would every 20 minutes meet with a university student. He was so personable. And that was really what is the first Motzei Shabbat of his tenure as chief rabbi. He went to the local bagel bakery where all the teenagers hang out, and he just hung out with them and sat and chatted to them. That's what he wanted. Now, where did he get this from? Where did this midah come from? Rabbi Sacks always puts it down to one of the meetings with his mentor. His mentor was the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He wasn't a Chabadnik, and yet I think he took many wonderful things from Chabad. And what does he tell the story? Rabbi Sacks was a university student in Cambridge. He came from a traditional, mainstream, Anglo-Jewish household, not a particularly learned house, traditional, kept Shabbat, etc., etc. And he went to Cambridge. He was the head of the student union, the Jewish student union there, a real up and rising star in the academic world. And due to the Six-Day War, when people started asking themselves questions of Jewish identity, and due to his involvement with student affairs in Cambridge, he decided to try and pursue his Jewish identity further. And he'd heard about lots of leaders in the United States, and he went for a summer to the States to visit relatives, to tour, and he wanted to see famous Jewish leaders. And he got a meeting with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which changed his life. And this is what he said changed it. He went in with a list of things to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe answered some of them, but suddenly the Rebbe turned the tables, and he started asking the young Jonathan Sacks, what are you doing in Cambridge? How many Jews do you think there are in Cambridge? How many of them attend services? How many of them are Jewishly involved? And then he turned around to Rabbi Sacks and said, and what are you doing about it? And Rabbi Sacks said, he started a sentence by saying, in the situation I find myself, and started making an excuse. And he said, the Rebbe turned to him and said, you don't find yourself in a situation. You put yourself into a situation. And if you put yourself into that situation, you can put yourself into a different situation. Live intentionally, the Rebbe was telling him. And the Rebbe told him more. He told him, I want you to go and become a rabbi. I want you to teach. And this was the beginning of Rabbi Sacks's rabbinic career. In other words, what Rabbi Sacks did, and I can tell you that literally everybody I know who is involved in Jewish education today, whether they're rabbis, whether they're people who came through the youth movements, whether they're communal workers, whether they're academics, everyone has a story to tell about their meeting with Rabbi Sacks. Everyone talks about, I went to discuss my PhD with him, and what have you. So for me, that's really one of the very special things about him, which I think is lesser known, the degree to which he really raised a generation of leaders. And he set himself to do this from the moment he was chief rabbi. He wrote a book, Will We Have Jewish Grandchildren? And he was desperately worried about assimilation in Britain, that acculturation would become assimilation and the disappearance of Jews. And he set himself to establishing the Jewish community, establishing Jewish schools. He was very proud when he finished his chief rabbinate that outside the Haredi world, not including their statistics, 65% of Jewish children were in a Jewish school, which is a huge statistic, considering. I think the statistic today, I'm not talking about necessarily high school, but certainly primary school. So let's talk a little bit about Rabbi Sacks and his Torah. And if you saw my source sheet, well, I guess some of you haven't seen it, but when I share it, you'll see we're going to go through his entire library and going to learn a lot about him. I'm going to start off with talking about his message to the world. And I'll start off with a story of something he said. Some years ago, I was at he came to visit Yeshivat Eretz HaTzvi, where I teach. And somebody asked him, one of the teachers asked him, what message do you have for the modern Orthodox community? You're the leader of the modern Orthodox community. What message do you have for us? And his response was something very, very surprising. This is what he said. He said, I don't view myself as a modern Orthodox leader. And we were like, you what? Who would be more of a modern Orthodox leader than you? You are the ultimate modern Orthodox leader. You have read everything. You're able to comment on how Torah affects the world, on how the world knowledge affects Torah. Who other than you? And listen to what he said. He said, if I describe myself, he said like this, sorry, I'll say it differently. He said, in the world, the Jews are a small minority of the world. Within Judaism, Orthodoxy is a minority of Judaism. Within Orthodoxy, modern Orthodoxy is a minority of Orthodoxy. If I describe myself as a modern Orthodox rabbi, I am describing myself as a minority of a minority of a minority. And now he said, do you know how Avram described himself, or how people described Avraham Avinu? When he came to buy the cave in Machpelah, they said, Nasi Elohim ata b'tochenu. You are a prince of God in our midst. A prince of God. You represent God to the world. He said, last week, I was in Emory University and I had a public conversation with the Dalai Lama. It was in front of 20,000 people, he said. Do you think I'd be doing that if I was just a modern Orthodox rabbi? Rabbi Sacks deeply believed that there was something for the Torah to talk to the world. And here, let's just take a look at something that he wrote here in his book, Future Tense, which is all about, well, it's a very, very inspirational book. Let's read a few paragraphs. I hope you see it on the screen. Judaism is not for Jews alone. If it were, it would make no sense. The God of Abraham is not a tribal God. He's the creator of heaven and earth. The God of Israel is not only the God of Israel, he made all human beings in his image. The God of the Hebrew Bible did not limit his blessings to one nation. After the flood, he made a covenant with all humanity. Abraham and his descendants are not the only people in the Bible to encounter God. Abraham's family are not the only moral heroes. So is Pharaoh's daughter. So is Job. The Israelites are not the only people to whom God sends prophets. So were the people of Nineveh, to whom God sent Jonah. Through you, said God to Abraham, all the families on earth will be blessed. So his first point is that we believe that Hashem is the God of the world. And now he says, Judaism was never meant for Jews alone. It contains a message for all humanity. And listen to this line, much in the 21st century will depend on whether this message or a different one prevails. Judaism belongs to the human conversation, and we must take the trouble to share our ideas with others and let others share theirs with us. For a long time, most of history, this was simply not possible. The world was not interested in what Jews had to say. Either they were to be converted or assimilated, or they were the other to be reviled. But this has changed for two reasons. First, liberal democracies allow space for a multiplicity of voices. We have a right to speak and do so in our own person. That is the glory of liberal democracy. Second, because of the existence of the state of Israel, Jews can speak on equal terms. No longer do they need to be haunted by the trauma of homelessness. So what he's saying is that the world needs to hear our message. And I'm going to talk about this in a minute. He says in a different book, in a pamphlet that he produced after he became chief rabbi, as he was standing down, he said there is no contradiction, not even a conflict, between contributing to humanity and affirming our distinctive identity. To the contrary, being what we are, we contribute to the world what only we can give. And this is the remarkable contribution that Rabbi Sacks made to the world. He was trained in philosophy and economics, and because he was entirely at home with the entire gamut of secular literature, he was able to bring the voice of Torah to the world. In fact, he wrote very passionately in future tense. He writes, if we're not engaged with the wider world, then we won't be able to apply Torah to it. Just like somebody who is an expert in Jewish law, but if he doesn't know the medicine, can't rule on medical topics. So likewise, if you don't understand the world of philosophy, economics, sociology, you won't be able to say anything. And in this regard, I mean, he was quite unbelievable. The head of his office told me once that he read at least a book a day. A friend of mine told me that he once stayed with him for a Shabbat. He was a scholar in residence. He stayed in his house. He went up to rest on Shabbat afternoon for a couple of hours, and he took a few books off the bookshelf, and he said to the Balabayit, I'd like to just borrow these. Is that okay? He said, sure, take them. When he came down from his rest, he put them back on the bookshelf. And the Balabayit said, no, you can take them, just return them sometime. And Rabbi Sacks says, I don't need to. I've already read them. A couple of hours, 4 books. He had really read everything, but not only that. I've heard him quoting music from Beethoven to the Beatles to Leonard Cohen to Eminem. I've heard him quote movies from Shawshank Redemption to Parasite. He spoke to kings and presidents, the Pope, the Dalai Lama. I'll give you a great story, right? A great story about Prince Charles. He was on the way back from Prime Minister Rabin's funeral, and he had been asked by Prince Charles to accompany him on the royal flight. So he was on the plane with Prince Charles and with John Major and with Gordon Brown and all the prime ministers. And on the way home, what did he do? You're on a flight, you read. He took out a sefer and started reading. Prince Charles said to him, what's that book? It looks interesting. He said, it's called a Mikra Gedolot, and it's the Bible with commentaries. Prince Charles says, will you learn it with me? And he said that he had a hour-long chavruta with Prince Charles, while Prince Charles was standing and he was sitting. And he said it was just amazing. He quoted the pasuk from Tehillim, Daber edotecha lifnei melachim v'lo evosh. I will teach your laws to kings and not be embarrassed. And I've been led to understand that him and Prince Charles had an ongoing conversation about issues of morality. And the thing is, when he spoke on the world stage, he wasn't just talking politics. He spoke, everything came from the core of Torah. He brought Torah to all, and that's why I brought you all of these different pictures of books, which I want to talk about and just show you. His first book on this topic was The Persistence of Faith, 1991, Religion, Morality, and Society in a Secular Age, arguing that we can't afford in a secular age to give up on religion and morality. In 2001, after the 9/11, after the attack on the Twin Towers, he wrote The Dignity of Difference, How to Avoid the Clash of Civilizations. Can religion be a force for peace rather than for violence? This recurred in 2015 when he wrote Not in God's Name, Confronting Religious Violence. He was passionate to solve the conflicts of the world. One of the issues that he was so passionate about was that we can't allow morality and God and religion to be eclipsed. And he saw the new scientists, people like Yuval Noah Harari, people like Dawkins, who were saying that all we are what he calls the selfish gene, right? All we are a product of science and mutation. And he wrote the book, The Great Partnership, to explain the place for religion in society. Let me just read a few lines with you to understand what he says. Meaning is made and sustained in conversations. It lives in relationships, marriages, families, communities, and societies. It is told in narrative, invoked in prayer, enacted in ritual, encoded in sacred texts, celebrated in holy days, and sung in songs of praise. Science takes things apart to see how they work. Religion puts them together to see what they mean. They speak different languages and use different powers of the brain. And he basically says, why are we fighting? Why is religion, morality, fighting against science? There's room for both of them. They are, as he says, twin perspectives, right? For the sake of human dignity, science must be accompanied by another voice, not in opposition to science, but as the humanizing voice of what we call the soul. There is no greater defense of human dignity than the phrase from the first chapter of the Bible that dared call the human being the image of God, rather than the selfish gene. So he's arguing for there to be a sense of values in society, and that comes even more in his new book, Morality, which just came out this year, Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times. And there he tells the story of how society has become individualistic. Instead of the we talk about the I. And he basically says, if you look at the last line on page 2 here, where morality is outsourced to either the market or the state, society has no substance. Only systems, and systems are not enough. The market and the state are about wealth and power. The market is about wealth and the state is about power. And they are hugely beneficial to the wealthy and the powerful, but not always to the poor. And therefore, he wants to say, where there is no shared morality, there is no society. He's arguing that we have to have a moral message within society. He plugged away at this. His first book, 91, his last book, 2020, for 30 years, not letting the world off the hook. And saying that we need more than science. We can't just give in and say that we're going to be an individualistic society. Religion has so much to give. And I'm going to talk a bit more of this in a moment. On the other side, Rabbi Sacks was, of course, a Rav. And he deeply cared, as I mentioned before, deeply cared about developing Jewish resilience, the flowering of ruchniut, of religiosity, and unity in the Jewish world. Let me just give a few examples, and we can take a look at some of his books just quickly, and then I'll talk about some of the messages, right? His first book, Traditional Alternative, Orthodoxy and the Future of the Jewish People. His second one, a Jewish book, One People, Tradition, Modernity, and Jewish Unity. They're both dedicated to the changes that took place in the Jewish world since emancipation. Haredim, Reform, Zionism, modern Orthodoxy, whatever you have, how are we going to be? He wants to describe them as everybody has climbed up a separate peak. We've all climbed up to where we want to be, but now we're all on different peaks and none of us will climb down. How are we going to be one people? How are we going to take those traditional alternatives and yet join together? Will we have Jewish grandchildren? Right, the question of Jewish continuity. And maybe I want to focus on this book, Radical Then, Radical Now, or as it's called, a letter in America, a letter in a scroll. Well, you can't see it because of the reflection. A letter in a scroll. He wrote this for university students. And what he wanted to do was to show them that Judaism was a revolution. That, you know, it's amazing. One of my friends put it this way. You know, when he stood down from being chief rabbi, Prince Charles said about him that he was a light to the nations, an Or LaGoyim. But once Jews saw he was an Or LaGoyim, then he became an Or LaYehudim. I'd put it this way. In Radical Then, Radical Now, he's trying to tell students, stay in there. You look at this, Judaism is something you've inherited. It's an old relic. But actually, it is something which is revolutionary. It will change your life. And most important, it's yours. Here, I want to read a section with you because I find it so amazing. This is the beginning of his book. And he says like this: we are in a vast library. In every direction we look, there are bookcases. Each has shelves stretching from floor to ceiling. Every shelf is full of books. We're surrounded by the recorded thoughts of many people, some great, some less so, and we can reach out and take any book we wish. All we have to do is choose. We begin to read, we can break off and try a different subject or a different approach. There's no limit. Once the book no longer interests us, we can put it back on the shelf where it'll wait for the next reader to pick it up. It makes no claim on us. It's just a book. That, for the contemporary secular culture of the West, is what identity is like. We are browsers in the library. And by the way, this was written at the cusp of the internet, right? But with the internet, we can do it so much more easily. There are many different ways of living, and none exercise any particular claim on us. As browsers, though, we remain intact, but untouched. Judaism asks us to envisage an altogether different possibility. Imagine that while browsing in the library, you come across one book unlike the rest, which catches your eye because on the spine is written the name of your family. Intrigued, you open it and see many pages written by different hands in many different languages. You start reading it and gradually you begin to understand what it is. It is the story each generation of your ancestors has told for the sake of the next, so that everyone born into this family can learn where they came from, what happened to them, what they lived, and why. As you turn the pages, you reach the last, which carries no entry but a heading. It bears your name. What was he saying? He's telling young people, your name is in the book, right? In English, in American version, it's called a letter in a scroll, right? A letter in a scroll. What's your letter going to be? And he says, you've got this legacy. What are you going to do with it? And then the rest of the book, he shows you that Judaism is revolutionary. He wrote a book in 2005, Ethics of Responsibility to Heal a Fractured World, basically talking about how the Jewish message is one of chesed. And I'll talk about this in a second, okay? And of course, we all know about his amazing commentary to the Torah, Covenant and Conversation, his Machzorim, which really, the introductions are phenomenal. They frame the whole Chagim, his Siddur, and his Haggadah. So many additions to the Jewish bookshelf. It is quite remarkable. So I want to say that Rabbi Sacks really was a Yachid B'doro. As somebody once put it, when the Torah is looking for a leader, it says you have to go El HaShofet Asher Yeh B'Yamim Ha'em. You have to go to a leader who is in that generation. And what they mean by that generation is somebody who understands the world you live in, because otherwise you can't apply Torah to the world. Rabbi Sacks was exactly that. And I'll say maybe two last points. I want to talk about technology, humor, and music. Number one, he really believed in technology. And when I say believed in technology, let me share maybe a piece of his Torah in this regard. Rabbi Sacks spoke about the birth of the Torah. And he says, our religion is the first religion which was given how? In writing. And he says, why is that so remarkable? Because he says a quantum leap happened in civilization just around the time that the Torah was written. What was it, he says? Well, if you take ancient Egypt, there were hieroglyphics. But hieroglyphics, in Hebrew, it's called Ktav HaChartumim. Because only the Chartumim, only the elite priests could read it, because it had so many symbols that you need to be trained in it. But the average person couldn't read. They were illiterate. But with an alphabet, suddenly the alphabet was created around that time. What does alphabet do? It democratizes knowledge. Because all you need to learn is 22 symbols and everybody can read. He says, that's remarkable. It's a revolution. It's an earthquake. Suddenly everybody has access to knowledge. And he says, suddenly with writing and reading, everything is opened. He said, what the Torah was given in writing, it's to say we all need to own it. He then said there was another big leap forward, thousands of years later, with what? With the printing press. Because then you could only write it out from scribe to scribe, but now you could print and disseminate. And we saw the printing of Chumashim and Talmud and the Shulchan Aruch. But he said the biggest transformation is going to be the internet. The internet is going to democratize knowledge in a way we've never seen before. And Rabbi Sacks embraced the new technology of the internet in an unbelievable way. The director of his office told me that when he even joined the chief rabbinate, but afterwards he said, I want the center of what I do to be my website. And he used technology. He was constantly putting out videos on YouTube. And he was even working on a project with the Steven Spielberg project to be able to create a 3D hologram of himself giving answers to people so that people could radio in for. He really believed technology was a tool that Hashem, just like Hashem had given the Torah, just as the alphabet was creating, the internet was a gift. And that's why we have so much. Go online and you can hear so much of him. He believed in the power of humor. He always told jokes. And in his book, Celebrating Life, he says, humor is a gift Hashem has given us. Always told jokes. And the other thing he loved was music. He loved music, found it uplifting. Rabbi Shaul Robinson in Manhattan told this great story where he says that Rabbi Sacks was speaking in his shul and they were walking to shul on a Shabbos morning. And there are streams of people rushing past them to get a seat in the shul because everybody wanted to hear Rabbi Sacks. And Rabbi Sacks is not worrying about what he's going to say. He turns around to Rabbi Robinson and he says, is davening going to be inspirational? Are people going to sing? And he really saw singing in Tefillah. In England, he changed the whole liturgy in England with the Shabbaton choir, took out all the chazanut and tried to bring in more popular tunes, tried to get people singing. And he really believed that that would elevate people to a spiritual high. And Rabbi Robinson said that when he got to shul, he huddled with the chazan for a full 5 minutes, selecting the tunes. He wanted there to be participatory davening. Rabbi Sacks was a true Jewish leader, taking care of every segment of the Jewish experience. But now I'm going to get to my last bit of my speech, or my last bit of my class. And I want to just join the global Rabbi Sacks with the Jewish Rabbi Sacks and make a point here. Rabbi Sacks did something incredible. We read it before. He felt that Judaism had a message for the world. And how did he do this? He really felt that if you studied Judaism, Judaism had things to teach everyone. Here, let me share my screen again and we'll tell a story or two. Let's read this little passage from one of his books. Sorry, here we go. I once took Britain's leading childcare expert to a Jewish school, where for the first time she saw young children rehearsing the Shabbat table. 5-year-old parents blessing 5-year-old children and welcoming 5-year-old guests. In other words, it's a Shabbat party at kindergarten. She, a non-Jew, was enthralled. She asked the children what they liked most about Shabbat. They replied, it's the time when mum and dad don't have to rush off. Maybe nowadays we'd say, it's time when mum and dad aren't busy with their phones. She said to me afterwards, "You're giving those children the greatest gift, the gift of a tradition, and it is saving their parents' marriages." Rabbi Sacks really believed that if we could learn the lesson of Shabbat, we could give the lesson to the world, the way that Shabbat created family time, the way that Shabbat unplugged us from the internet, that it would be able to give a message to the world. And he wanted to teach it. He wanted to teach this notion of how Shabbat is, on the one hand, Ben Adam L'Chaveiro, connects us, Ben Adam L'Makom. It's a day when we experience our own limitations. That's just one great example. I'm going to give you two other examples. Rabbi Sacks recently has been trying to talk to societies who are in a multi-ethnic world and are feeling their societies are fragmenting. We've certainly seen this in America, right? Where you have different groups and everybody feels there's no string which strings them together anymore. It's been true even in multicultural Britain as well, where people are asking themselves now, what do people have in common? Maybe the thing they have most in common is the shops where they buy their clothes and Netflix. So what's going to hold us together as a society? How are we not going to fragment? And Rabbi Sacks came up with an amazing model. And just to explain, he writes in his books and he says in his interviews that he spoke about this to the Prime Minister Gordon Brown. He spoke to Tony Blair about this. And he said, I've tried to convince 4 different education secretaries in the British government, 4 successive education secretaries, that this is what they have to do. Let me explain. He says, we Jews have a ceremony. It's called the Seder. It's one of the most experienced Jewish ceremonies. What do? We tell our story. But we don't only tell our story, we ask questions about it. We wrestle with it, and we are interpreted. And whether we are the wise son or the wicked son, or whichever son, we all have a place around the table. And we celebrate, but we also tell our story, and we ask it, how does it relate to us? He says like this, or maybe let me take one intermediate step. He looks at the United States of America and says, the United States of America was a new society. What did they do? If you go to any memorial in the United States, you go to the Lincoln Memorial, and on the wall of the Lincoln Memorial is Lincoln's speeches. He says, because America had to create formative texts. In London, he says, there aren't any speeches on the wall. In fact, he says, take Churchill Memorial. There's no word of his speeches. There's just one word. And what is that on the statue? Churchill. That's it. No, we shall fight them on the beaches. Nothing. He says, society needs to create a canonical text, or as he called it, a covenantal text. And he suggested the following. In England, there's a very hallowed day, what they call Remembrance Sunday, the day when they remember the war dead at the close to the 11th of November, 11 o'clock in the morning, when the First World War ended. And he says, this is what I suggest. Take the morning and remember the past, remember the war dead, and then take the afternoon and have every family and every school discuss a text that is agreed on by the nation and ask, what is Britain? What is our meaning? Where do we come from? Where are we going to? What did he try to do? He tried to take the notion of our Seder and say, this is the recipe where we can all unite around one text and become one society, where we can create a covenant of a society. This will be a remedy. This will be a tonic for a divided times. What an amazing Kiddush Hashem to go and take the messages of Torah and to heal the world with them. Let me give one third example. And it's a lovely story. And I deliberately brought different texts here to share with you to get a sense of his prose. But let's look at this great story. It's on the screen. In 1966, an 11-year-old black boy moved with his parents and family into a white neighborhood. Sorry, this is in Washington. Sitting with his 2 brothers and 2 sisters on the front step of his house, he waited to see how they would be greeted. They were not. Passers-by turned to look at them, but no one gave them a smile or even a glance of recognition. All the fearful stories he'd heard about how whites treated blacks seemed to be coming true, I think that's meant to say, coming true. Years later, writing about those first days in their new home, he says, I knew we were not welcome here. I knew we would not be liked here. I knew we would have no friends here. I knew we should not have moved here. As he was thinking those thoughts, a white woman came home from work. passed by on the other side of the road. She turned to the children with a broad smile, said, "Welcome." Disappearing into the house, she emerged minutes later with a tray laden with drinks and cream cheese and jelly sandwiches, which she brought over to the children, making them feel at home. That moment, the young man later wrote, changed his life. It gave him a sense of belonging where there was none before. It made him realize at a time when race relations in the United States were still fraught, that a black family could feel at home in a white area, and there could be relationships that were colorblind. That young man, Stephen Carter, is now a law professor at Yale University, and he eventually wrote a book about what he learned that day, and he called it Civility. The name of the woman, he tells us, was Sarah Kestenbaum, and he adds that she was a religious Jew. In the Jewish tradition, he notes, such civility is called chesed, the doing of acts of kindness, which in turn derive from the understanding that human beings are made in the image of God. Civility, adds, itself may be seen as a part of chesed. It does indeed require kindness towards our fellow citizens, including the one who are strangers, even when it is hard. In other words, what Rabbi Sacks did in this story, and he was an expert at picking out things out of world literature just like this, he says, we have the tools, chesed, we can talk about it. In his book, To Heal a Fractured World, which this is taken from, is all about this theme. Greatness, even for God, certainly for us, is not to be above people, but to be with them, hearing their silent cry, sharing their distress, bringing comfort to the distressed and the dignity to the deprived. The message of the Hebrew Bible is that civilizations strive not by strength, but by how they respond to the weak, not by wealth, but how they care for the poor, not by power, but how they concern for the powerless. What renders a culture invulnerable is the compassion it shows to the vulnerable. And what I can say about Rabbi Sacks was he never stopped bringing the message of Torah to the world. When he talks about globalization, he uses the example of Migdal Bavel. When he talks about world violence, he brings the example of Cain and Hevel and the brothers of Yaakov selling Yosef. When he wants to he wants to talk about society, people becoming individuals, he uses models from our tradition in order to teach the world about Torah. So this is really something incredible that Rabbi Sacks managed to do. And I'd say the opposite. When he teaches Torah, he'll frequently bring, academics like Alistair McIntyre and lighter ones like Dan Ariely. He'll bring from Nietzsche to the New York columnist David Brooks to show us how contemporary society can sometimes highlight new things in Torah. So what a remarkable voice, what a remarkable force, both because of his eloquence, both because he just had read it all and seen it all and met them all. And this is who he was. If I have to share one message from Rabbi Sacks, well, first of all, I think we've learned a lot of messages today. Number one, take young people seriously. When you see somebody, it might be your grandchild, but it might be somebody else's grandchild, and you see a kid with, even without talent, find that talent. Tell them not what they're bad at, tell them what they're good at, and encourage them. If they've got a nice voice, tell them to be a shliach tzibur in shul. If they've got, if they're just a lovely person, tell them to volunteer in the local old age home or to get involved in a project with children with special needs or what have you. Encourage young people, right? Don't be embarrassed about being Jewish and showing your Judaism to the world, because we have the potential to give Jewish messages and create a Kiddush Hashem. He always used to say that non-Jews are embarrassed by Jews who are embarrassed by their Judaism. And non-Jews are proud of Jews who are proud of their Judaism. He tells a lovely story that once he was in Cambridge and there was a storm and his kippah flew off and he had to walk home without a kippah. And one of his non-Jewish friends in college came up to him the next day and said to him, "Jonathan, are you okay?" And he said, "Why?" He said, "I saw you yesterday without a head covering. What's going on? Are you having a religious crisis?" He said even his non-Jewish friends realized how important religion was for him and they were worried about him. And he really believed that we should be proud about Judaism and realize that it has a treasure for the world. And then in terms of our Judaism, the important to educate, the important that everybody can contribute. And I'll say one last thing. One of his themes was really, he has many themes, covenant, but one thing was responsibility. And he tells a wonderful midrash about Avram Avinu. It's a midrash about Avram Avinu that Avram is walking around the world and suddenly he sees a palace on fire. And he says, where's the owner of the palace? There must be an owner. And suddenly God comes out and says, I'm the owner of the palace. What's this midrash? And then what does Hashem? Vayom Hashem al Avram lech lecha. Avram, God says to Avram, off you go. He says, this is crazy. He says, the owner of the palace, why doesn't the owner of the palace put out the flames? And he says that the world is on fire. The palace is the world, and the world's on fire. What do you mean the world's on fire? The world was on fire at the time of Abraham from immorality, from depravity. And God was waiting for somebody to walk by and notice that the world was in pain. Avram says, wait, if you created this world, where's the owner? You should put out the flames. And God says, I'm the owner, but lech lecha. You have to go and solve the problems in the world. I won't solve them for you. This world is a world where I give over to you. You are empowered to solve the problems in the world. And Rabbi Sacks took that very seriously. He worked tirelessly. I can't even imagine, as after he's passed and I'm hearing everything he did, I can't even believe how he kept up that energy at his age 70. But he did. He was tireless. And every time he finished one job, what's the next? And what's the next? And he really believed he had to, look what he tried to solve. He tried to create a whole new commentary, a whole new siddur prayer for the Jewish people, a whole new commentary on the Torah, to solve problems like world violence, like globalization, like isolation in an internet age. Who takes on those global challenges? But he felt Hashem was whispering in his ear every day, Lech lecha, you go put out the fires in the world, and that he embraced. Yeh zichro baruch. We don't have him anymore, but you know what? We're very lucky. I can't think of too many people for whom we have so much written, over 20 books, so many videos, so many interviews. You can spend a month just watching him on the internet. And therefore we can still be really, really inspired by his messages, empowered by his call to action. And that's what I want to encourage every one of you to do. Pick up a book in your area of interest, anything from Jewish unity to globalization, to morality, to Jewish commentary. And you will find his very clear and inspirational voice talking to you. So thank you. And if there are any questions, I'm really happy to take questions. And now's a great time.
Do we have any questions? You can also, if you don't want to speak, feel free to type it in the chat box. Is anybody who anything you want to share? Don't be bashful. They're normally not. Well, I think, it was a really beautiful and powerful tribute to just an incredible person. Elizabeth, did you unmute yourself because you want to ask a question there?
I don't want to ask a question. I just want to say thank you very much, Rabbi Israel. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And I have regards from my granddaughter who's studying in Israel, in Lindenbaum, and she said to say hi, that you're her best teacher. Her name
Thank you.
Tari Stockman. Tari.
Oh, sure.
So it's my granddaughter.
Elizabeth, we were talking about Tari before you got on. So.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. I was a few minutes late. Sorry.
No, it was just Rabbi Israel and I.
Ah, okay. That's very funny. Okay. She sends regards.
Thank you. I'll see her tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow, she said. Yeah. Thank you again. It was a wonderful.
Since Elizabeth mentioned that, I might just mention that it's been a lot of years since you taught me at Midrash HaRova, Rob Alex.
Oh my gosh!
So
okay.
It was back in '96, so quite a while ago. But thank you.
Okay, now I recognize the face. Okay, sorry.
Okay, now it's my turn then.
It's a party. Past students.
Hi, Rav Alex. It's Talia.
Hi, how you doing? Yes, I saw you there.
This is the one time I've ever put my camera on for these things, just in case.
Fantastic.
It's lovely to hear your
very much.
Hear you teaching us.
It's really a pleasure. And I sent the sheet, so if you want to send out the sheet to everybody, then if anybody wants the source sheet that I sent out, you're welcome. Sorry about the typos. I did it very late last night. So I'll probably fix them for the next time I teach this, but it was done specially for today.
Well, we thank you, and it really was a beautiful overview, as Heather just typed before down below. Beautiful overview. Just capturing just a little bit of the incredible body of work of Rabbi Sacks. And as you said, it is a profound loss for the Jewish people. And once again, echoing your words, I mean, the responsibility is ours, and he's left us a huge body of wisdom and knowledge, and it's our responsibility. And so I want to just encourage everyone, as Rabbi Alex said, encourage everyone. This summer, we're going to be running as we'll release tomorrow or Friday, all of Australia-wide will be running a summer program. We're going into the summer program, encouraging people to pick up books, pick up a sefer this summer and learn. And it's inspired by the legacy of Rabbi Sacks. And, there's so much there. There's so much to learn. And I want to just finish off with a blessing to you, Rabbi Alex, that obviously, Rabbi Sacks' voice will be sorely missed. And we need tremendous guidance and wisdom to get us through the challenging times ahead. But, Rabbi Sacks would have wanted you, as he challenged you and as he blessed you, to find your own voice. And you have, and your voice is an essential one. And may Hashem lift up that voice and give you wisdom and insight and strength to continue to teach Am Yisrael and to inspire us in your own way, certainly guided by Rabbi Sacks, but in your own way. And Hashem should bless you in your teaching and everything that you do, but also bless all of us as well. It's a time that we need to step up. We really need to step up. So we thank you for your time. And it's been a pleasure and an honor to host you this evening. And Hashem should bless all of us. And Yehi Zichro Baruch, as you said, may his memory be a blessing through our actions and through the way that we live our life inspired by his work. So thank you very much.
Sorry, thank you very much all.
So can I ask a question? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. So Rabbi Israel, you mentioned earlier in your share that within Judaism, different kind of streams, whether it's Orthodox, Zionist, or Reform, or ever, climb different peaks, and nobody is actually willing to climb down, meaning that basically everybody believes kind of their way is the way, and everybody's kind of pulling in their own direction. I find that very interesting, and I just want to know if you can perhaps refer me to some Rabbi Sacks writing about this particular topic and how to, I suppose.
The book is One People. One People.
One People.
That's
okay,
where he
great.
talks about it.
All right, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, please excuse me because I've got to run to another meeting. So thank you very much and good evening.
Yishar Koach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kol Tuv. Bye.
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 Good night, everyone.
Good night.